London, late Saturday afternoon. Horse Guards parade. The city breathing in a rare moment of sun. The square, an expanse of ancient stone and echoing history, was crammed with tourists, each holding up their phones like talismans, hungry for a piece of ceremony. There, at the edge of the crowd, Sergeant Daniel Reed sat tall and unwavering atop his horse, Regal. To most onlookers, Reed and his jet-black mount were living statues, polished brass, perfect posture, tradition crystallized. But beneath the pressed uniform, behind the stoic eyes, something else hummed, something sharp and real. Reed was not here for spectacle. His job was not simply to play the part, but to guard, to react, to protect, to remain alert when everyone else was lulled by the pageantry. It happened all at once, or maybe it was building, second by second, beneath the city's noise. Regal's ears snapped forward. The big horse shifted his weight, muscles bunching beneath Reed, hooves clinking against stone. Reed's gloved hand squeezed the reins, not from nerves, but from habit, the centuries-old muscle memory of cavalrymen ready to spring into action. There was a tension in the air that only a soldier or a horse could feel. Suddenly, the square exploded into a chorus of shouts and the shrill wail of a distant horn. Reed's vision narrowed. Directly ahead, a low gray van, scuffed and sun-bleached, sat idling just beyond the iron barricade, in clear violation of protocol. The van's engine rumbled, not the idle purr of a delivery driver, but a growl, steady and insistent. Tourists ignored it, too busy with their cameras, but Regal's nostrils flared, and he stamped his hoof 3 times, a code drilled into him during months of merciless training. Reed felt the vibrations through the saddle. 3 stamps, immediate threat. Before Reed could process, a little girl appeared in his peripheral vision, standing far too close to the barricade, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. She looked impossibly small, lost in a crowd of tall strangers, her wide eyes locked on the van. Reed's mind raced. Instinct kicked in. He steered Regal forward, the big horse blocking the girl from the vehicle. His voice, low and steady, "Ma'am, you need to move back," was swallowed by the chaos. Suddenly, the van door flew open. A man with a rough beard and a too-tight jacket stepped out, hands raised in mock surrender. "It's fine, I'm her father," the man yelled, voice sharp and grating. The girl shrank back, pressing into Reed's side. Reed's heart hammered. I saw it in her eyes, the silent plea. She whispered, "They said they'll take me if I scream." Time froze. For a split second, the centuries fell away, and there was only the soldier, the child, the horse, and the threat. Regal reared up, hooves pawing the air. The crowd gasped as one, phones forgotten, a ripple of shock racing through the tourists. The sunlight flashed on the horse's mane, sweat glistening along his neck. Reed leaned forward, knees locked, every muscle tensed. Regal crashed down, hooves missing the van's hood by inches, and the man jumped back, losing his balance. In that instant, Reed realized just how close he'd come to catastrophe. He broke every protocol, every line drilled into him at Sandhurst, but he did not regret it. Across the square, someone screamed. The van's engine roared. For a split second, Reed saw another figure, a teenage boy on an electric scooter, weaving through the crowd, eyes fixed on the little girl. The boy's backpack bulged awkwardly. Reed's brain, trained for 1,000 worst-case scenarios, made the leap. This was not a random family drama. This was a kidnapping attempt, planned and brazen, carried out in the heart of London's tourist district. Regal wheeled, steel shoes scraping the cobblestones. Reed shouted, "Police, get back!" But his voice barely registered over the shouts and car alarms. Regal planted himself between the girl and the van, the horse's body a living shield. The van's driver, teeth bared, gunned the engine, inching forward, testing the boundaries. Reed reached for his radio, thumb trembling as he pressed the emergency channel. In his other hand, he gripped the riding crop, not for show, but a last line of defense. Every eye in the square was on them now. Mothers clutched children. Tourists stepped back, phones raised but hands shaking. The parade, the centuries-old ritual, was shattered. In its place, panic, raw and unfiltered. Reed looked down at the girl. She clung to Regal's stirrup, eyes wide, lips trembling. At that exact moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Regal snorted, stamping again, head tossing, black tail slicing the air. The van's bumper edged closer, chrome catching the sun. The riding crop trembled in Reed's grip. He could hear his own breath, ragged in his ears. The girl whimpered, the sound almost lost in the chaos. Then, the world held still. A frozen instant. Regal, front legs raised, hooves glinting, seconds before coming down on the van's hood. The crowd, suspended between fear and awe. Reed, caught in the impossible choice, follow the rules or follow his gut. In that heartbeat, everything hung in the balance, and nothing would ever be the same. 20 minutes earlier, the atmosphere at Horse Guards Parade was almost serene in its ceremonial predictability. The afternoon light was mellow, the low hum of city life blending with the clip-clop of horses on parade. Sergeant Daniel Reed rode Regal with a quiet confidence that belied his internal vigilance. The parade ground shimmered with expectation. Tourists clustered along the iron barricades, their voices rising in a dozen languages, eyes wide with the promise of spectacle. Reed's uniform was immaculate, polished buttons gleaming, sword hanging perfectly by his side. The Household Cavalry, the pride of royal tradition, was drilled to perfection. Each movement, from adjusting the reins to the flick of a gloved wrist, was a performance honed by centuries. But for Reed, the pageantry was only the surface. He saw what others missed: the patterns in the crowd, the out-of-place details, the small tremors of danger hiding beneath the ceremony. Regal was a picture of discipline, his glossy black coat rippling over powerful shoulders. Only a few in the crowd noticed the horse's tension, a twitch of the ear, a restless shift of weight, the occasional stomp of a massive hoof. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To Reed, it was an alarm bell. He glanced at the tourists. A young couple in matching t-shirts posed for a selfie. A family pointed excitedly at Regal. And further down the line, a little girl, Lily, though Reed wouldn't learn her name until much later, pressed her face to the bars, arms tight around a battered stuffed rabbit. She seemed isolated, detached from the easy excitement of the crowd, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the pageantry. It was then that Reed noticed the gray van, parked just a little too close to the security cordon, engine idling. The driver, a man in a baseball cap, didn't get out, didn't interact, just sat behind the wheel, sunglasses masking his eyes. Reed's mind cataloged it: make, model, plate number. Nothing overtly suspicious, but something about the stillness of the van and the rigidity of the driver set his instincts on edge. He signaled quietly to Corporal Mays at the far end of the line, a simple nod that meant, "Watch that van." Mays, younger and still eager, nodded back. Reed shifted his focus, trusting Regal's instincts as much as his own. The horse's ears flicked toward the van. A moment later, Regal stomped his hoof once, then again. Reed tensed, recalling the training. 1 stomp, uncertainty. 2, caution. 3, threat. In the background, the changing of the guard began. The brass band swelled, horns and drums echoing against the ancient walls. The crowd surged, jostling for a better view, the line of soldiers snapping to attention. For a few moments, Reed had to force his mind into the rhythm of ritual, but his eyes kept darting back to the van. A cold wind swept through the square. The van's engine revved, barely audible over the music. Reed caught Regal's eye, or maybe it was his imagination, but the horse seemed to glare at the van. Reed's jaw tightened. He ran through scenarios: weapon in the van, a mad dash at the crowd, an attempted abduction. He'd seen it happen before, on grainy security footage from other cities. The world was no longer safe, even in places drenched with tradition. Suddenly, Regal stomped his hoof 3 times, loud enough to draw glances from nearby tourists. Reed sat up straighter. He didn't break character, but every muscle went on alert. His hand brushed the radio at his hip. He caught Maze again. The corporal nodded, moving subtly closer to the van's rear. At that moment, Lily edged closer to the barricade, eyes wide and body tense. Her small voice, almost lost in the noise, whispered to Reed, "Is it safe here?" Reed's heart squeezed. He forced a gentle smile. "You're safe, sweetheart. Just stay right there." The band's music faded, replaced by a hush that seemed to fall over the crowd. The van's door slid open a crack. Reed's pulse hammered in his ears. The man inside glanced out, scanned the crowd, and then, seeing something or someone, he slid the door shut again. Reed's earpiece crackled. "Reed, anything wrong?" It was Sergeant Collins, monitoring the security feed. Reed spoke in a low voice. "Van at the north entrance. Suspicious. Keep an eye." Collins responded, "Roger that. I'll alert patrol." Suddenly, a second figure appeared. A teenager on an electric scooter, backpack slung over one shoulder. He circled the van, eyes scanning the crowd, then shot a glance toward Lily. The two made eye contact, and Reed felt a chill. Something was being communicated in those silent looks. Reed shifted restlessly, muscles bunching. Reed squeezed his knees, reassuring the horse. "Easy, boy, not yet," he whispered. But in his gut, he knew something was about to snap. The gray van's engine revved again, the sound unnatural, like a held breath about to be released. Reed positioned Regal so the horse's massive body blocked Lily from the van. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Maze tense, one hand on his radio. The teenager on the scooter drifted closer, weaving through the crowd, a shark circling prey. All at once, the parade's carefully constructed order teetered on the edge. Reed looked at the crowd, the smiling faces, the flashes of cameras, the innocent laughter, and wondered how long they would stay ignorant of the storm brewing at their feet. Reed stamped once, twice, 3 times, a warning Reed could not ignore. The wind picked up, swirling dust across the parade ground. Reed's mind sharpened to a single point. Protect the girl, trust the horse, stay ready. In the space between two heartbeats, the world would shift, and all the careful order of ceremony would be swept away. While the air on Horse Guards Parade grew thick with expectation and unease, a different story pulsed beneath the surface, a story that began long before the crowd had even gathered. Regal, the imposing black gelding, was the product of relentless discipline and trust built over 8 grueling months. To every tourist craning for a selfie, he was a living monument. But beneath that polished exterior was a mind always at work, trained to read the world with an intensity no machine could match. Regal had not been born a parade horse. He'd arrived at the barracks as a bundle of nerves and muscle, wary of people, jumpy at the slightest noise. Reed still remembered their first day. The stall's sharp scent of hay, Regal's flared nostrils, and the stubborn set of his jaw. The horse was massive, yes, but also sensitive, almost too perceptive. Some handlers would have called him trouble. Reed saw something else, a kind of intelligence waiting to be channeled. Training began before dawn, in the dim light where shapes blurred and sounds echoed. Reed started with the basics, walking the perimeter of the parade ground, getting Regal used to city sounds, the rumble of buses, the honk of taxis, the sudden bark of a dog. At first, Reed spooked at everything, sides heaving, eyes rolling white. Reed spoke in low, even tones, never shouting, letting the calm seep in. Sometimes they just stood in silence, Reed's hand resting lightly on Regal's neck, breathing together. Then came the drills. Reed introduced the cues. 1 stamp meant pay attention. 2 meant shift position. 3 meant danger. It was painstaking, repetitive, and slow. Some days, Reed seemed to forget everything, refusing to move, tossing his head in frustration. Reed never rushed. He understood what few did. A cavalry horse wasn't just a vehicle, he was a partner, and that partnership was forged moment by moment. The real breakthrough came in the thunderous chaos of the firing range. Reed led Regal into a maze of gunfire sounds piped through speakers, simulating the disorder of a London emergency. The first time, Reed reared, wild-eyed and sweating. Reed stood his ground, anchoring them both. "Easy, boy, with me," he'd say, voice calm even as the noise battered his nerves. Over weeks, Reed learned to trust the sound of Reed's voice more than the panic in his own chest. The parade ground itself became their classroom. Reed marched Regal past flashing cameras, clicking smartphones, and chattering crowds. He taught the horse to stand still, motionless for minutes at a time, even when children darted too close or tourists poked with umbrellas. It was a kind of living meditation, an act of focus that burned away all distraction. Regal became a master at stillness, but beneath that poised surface, Reed knew, was a storm of awareness, eyes scanning, ears twitching, muscles ready to spring. Their bond deepened in quiet moments. After hours of training, Reed would unbuckle the heavy ceremonial tack and walk Regal in the barracks yard. Sometimes they moved together in silence, the horse matching Reed's steps, heads bent toward one another. Reed talked to him, not in the clipped commands of a drill, but in the easy tone one used with a friend. He told Regal about his own fears, the pressures of the job, the weight of tradition, the terror of letting someone down in a critical moment. He swore sometimes that Regal understood every word. Regal, in turn, taught Reed to listen. The subtlest flick of an ear, the smallest tension in a muscle, all meant something. Reed learned the language of hooves, the warning stomp, the anxious shuffle, the deliberate placement that told him when to be alert. He trusted Regal's instincts, even above his own. When the horse stamped 3 times, Reed never ignored it. That morning, before the parade, Reed had brushed Regal until the horse's coat gleamed, checking every shoe, every strap. "Big day," he'd murmured, sliding a hand down Regal's mane. The horse nickered softly, an answer, or maybe just the echo of Reed's own nerves. As the barracks came alive with shouts and orders, Reed took a moment, just the two of them, alone in the stall. "We're ready," he said. He meant it, for the ceremony, yes, but also for anything the world might throw at them. When the moment came, when the van idled in the forbidden spot and the air went taut, all of that training, the early mornings, the quiet talks, the battles with fear and chaos, snapped into place. Regal's stomp was not just a reflex, it was a message, a call to arms. Reed trusted it with his life. The crowd that day saw a perfect pair, soldier and steed, disciplined and proud. They saw the shine, the polish, the tradition. What they could not see was the invisible thread running between man and horse, the trust built in the hush of dawn, the courage found in facing fear together, the shared vow to stand guard no matter what. And as the seconds ticked down, Reed knew that everything, the ceremony, the child's life, even his own reputation, depended on that bond holding strong when the world's order began to crack. It's strange how quickly the world changes when you're 9 years old. One day you're laughing on the swings in your backyard, sunlight tangled in your hair, your mom calling from the kitchen for you to come inside. And then, all at once, it's different. That's what Lily Morgan would remember, the way everything had seemed so ordinary until it wasn't. 2 days before the parade, Lily had been walking home from school, tracing her fingers along the iron fence of her neighbor's yard, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Daisy, tight in one arm. She remembered the man who first spoke to her. He didn't seem scary, not at first. He smiled, said he was a friend of her mom's, said her mom needed her to come quick. Lily hesitated. Something in her belly felt wrong. But he looked kind. He said all the right things. By the time she realized, it was too late. He took her by the hand, his grip tightening, and led her away from the street she knew, away from safety. The next hours were a blur. Lily was taken to a cramped apartment with gray walls and windows that looked out onto a back alley. There was another man there, younger, with nervous eyes, who barely spoke. They kept telling her to be quiet, not to cry, not to scream. She hugged Daisy and tried not to look afraid, tried not to think about her mother or her own bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. That night, as the city hummed outside, she overheard their whispers, something about a van, about London, about the pickup. She didn't understand much, but she knew it was bad. The older man, the one who'd taken her, got angry if she made noise. Once he raised his voice and threatened to tie her up if she didn't stop fidgeting. Lily pressed her face into Daisy's fur and counted her breaths until the room grew quiet. By morning, she was hustled into the back of a car. No windows she could see through. The young man tried to make jokes, but his voice shook. Lily stayed silent, the rabbit a lifeline. They stopped for food she didn't want, made phone calls in low voices, and then, after what felt like forever, they brought her to the place that would stick in her mind for years, the parade ground. They told her not to speak to anyone, not to look for help. "We're just waiting," the older man said. "You stay quiet and nothing bad will happen." Lily nodded, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She saw police in the distance, but the men kept her close, always between her and anyone who might help. Now, standing at the barricade, watching the crowd swirl around her, Lily felt invisible. People snapped pictures, laughed, pointed at the horses. Nobody saw her, really saw her. She tried to catch a guard's eye once, but he looked right through her, his attention elsewhere. Her hands tightened around Daisy's neck. She tried to be brave. Maybe if she just waited, her mom would find her. Maybe someone would notice she didn't belong with these men. She stared at the huge black horse, the one everyone seemed to love. He was beautiful, strong and tall, like something out of a fairy tale. The man on his back looked like a storybook soldier, armor shining, eyes hidden beneath a helmet. Lily wondered if he was a knight or just another grown-up who wouldn't notice her. Suddenly, the van's engine roared, breaking her out of her daydream. The older man gripped her arm. "Don't move," he hissed. Lily's breath caught. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but his fingers dug into her wrist. The horse's eyes found hers. It was just for a moment, but Lily felt it. He saw her, really saw her, not just a face in the crowd. She thought she saw something in his gaze, a kind of promise, a quiet strength. Then the soldier moved, the horse stepping closer, putting his massive body between her and the van. The man on the horse looked down at her, and for the first time, someone really seemed to notice. "You're okay," he said quietly. His voice was soft, almost lost in the crowd. "I'm here." Tears prickled Lily's eyes, but she bit her lip. The man on the horse leaned down, eyes level with hers, and something in his face made her believe him. The older man shifted, annoyed. "She's with me," he barked at the soldier. But the soldier didn't move. The horse stayed firm. Lily found her voice, just a whisper. "They said they'll take me if I scream." The words slipped out, barely more than a breath, but the soldier heard them. His whole body changed. She saw it, felt it in the way the horse tensed. Suddenly, the world felt different. Maybe, for the first time, it could change for the better. Everything after happened so fast. The soldier's radio crackled, the crowd's noise surged. The man at her side tried to grab her, but the horse blocked him. People started shouting. Lily squeezed Daisy, eyes shut tight. She heard hooves strike pavement, felt the rush of air as the horse reared, and someone, maybe the soldier, shouted for help. For a moment, she thought she might disappear in the chaos. But she didn't. When she opened her eyes, the soldier was still there. the horse still standing guard. She wasn't invisible anymore. Someone finally saw her. Someone finally listened. And somewhere, deep inside, hope flickered back to life. The moment the crowd realized something was wrong, the energy on Horse Guard's parade changed in a heartbeat. Tourists who had been smiling, posing, and laughing suddenly found themselves swept up in a wave of confusion and dread. Phones, once raised for cheerful photos, now recorded trembling footage. The sound of a revving engine, usually lost beneath the buzz of London, sliced through the air, drawing every eye to the gray van parked too close to the security barrier. Regal's massive frame blocked Lily from the menacing vehicle. Reed's pulse thundered as he steadied the reins, legs pressing against Regal's flanks, ready for anything. He scanned the scene, the older man, Price, stepping out with a forced smile. The van's exhaust coughing smoke into the faces of stunned tourists. Reed's training kicked in, every second stretching long and taut. Regal's muscles coiled beneath him, ears pinned, tail slashing. There was no mistaking the horse's message. Danger, right here, right now. Price swaggered forward, voice dripping false charm. "She's my daughter. She wandered off, didn't she, sweetie?" His eyes flicked to Lily, then narrowed at Reed. Reed didn't break eye contact with Price. "Sir, you need to step back. This area is restricted." His voice was even, but every word carried the authority of the uniform and the steel beneath it. Price's mask slipped, replaced by a sneer. "Don't you get it? I said she's my kid." Around them, tourists froze, torn between watching and running. Some began live streaming, voices rising in nervous excitement. "What's going on? Did you get that?" one woman whispered, her phone pointed straight at Reed in the van. Suddenly, Price lunged forward, hand outstretched, reaching for Lily. The air snapped. Reed pulled Regal sideways, placing the horse directly between Price and the girl. Regal's tail whipped, swatting the van's hood, leaving a streak of sweat and hair. The crowd gasped. Reed's voice sharpened. "Stay back, now." Regal's training came alive in that instant. The great horse sidestepped with military precision, nostrils flaring. He planted himself, towering over Price, who found himself staring up at the barreled chest and snapping eyes of a true warhorse. For one electrified moment, nothing moved. Then Regal struck, not violently, but decisively. He stomped a hoof just inches from Price's foot, the sound cracking off the stones like a warning shot. Price stumbled backward, surprise flickering to fear. The tension in the crowd broke all at once. People screamed, some ducking behind the barricades, others pressing closer for a better view. "Somebody call the police," a tourist shouted. Dozens of phones flashed, capturing every second.
Behind Price, the van's engine belched smoke, rolling over the cobblestones in thick, choking clouds. The air filled with the stench of oil and panic. Reed's hand hovered over his radio. He didn't dare look away from Price, but he squeezed the trigger on his mic. "This is Sergeant Reed. Need immediate backup at Horse Guards. Suspected abduction in progress. Repeat, back up now." Price cried again, this time angrier. "You're making a mistake, officer." But Regal cut him off, pushing forward until his chest pinned Price against the van's fender. The man's bravado crumbled. He squirmed but couldn't escape. The tourists were shouting now, some begging Reed to arrest him, others filming with wide, horrified eyes. Suddenly, chaos erupted on the far side of the parade. Turner, the younger accomplice, shot out from the crowd on his electric scooter, weaving wildly between startled families. His eyes locked on Lily. "Move!" he screamed, kicking the scooter into high gear. Reed saw the blur in his peripheral vision, the second threat he'd been bracing for. In a single, fluid motion, Reed pivoted Regal, giving the horse the silent command they'd practiced 100 times. Regal surged forward, cutting off Turner's approach, the horse's shadow engulfing the young man and his scooter. Turner swerved, barely missing the barricade, tires squealing as he tried to slip past. Reed drew his riding crop, pointing it at Turner, voice booming over the din. "Step away! Police!" But Turner wasn't listening. He reached for Lily, stretching his arm through the crowd, desperate. Regal lashed out with his head, teeth bared, not to bite, but to intimidate. Turner recoiled, scooter tipping dangerously. The scene teetered on the edge of disaster. Reed's senses were on fire, the heat from Regal's back, the taste of sweat, the metallic ring of panic in the air. Somewhere a child was crying. Price thrashed beneath Regal's chest, but the horse held steady, the wall of muscle and discipline refusing to yield. Regal's presence was absolute. The tourists saw it, not just the power, but the intention. Here was an animal bred for war, trained for chaos, holding the line not with violence, but with certainty. Cameras flashed. Some in the crowd shouted encouragement, others screamed at Price and Turner to stop. Even the band, halfway through their ceremonial piece, fell silent. Finally, Price buckled. He shrank away from Regal, hands raised in surrender, mouth moving, but no words coming out. Turner, caught in the glare of hundreds of eyes, froze. The scooter wobbled and he dropped it, backing away. Reed seized the moment, swinging from the saddle. He kept Regal between Lily and the attackers, his free hand guiding the girl behind him. "You're safe. Stay with me," he said, his voice barely audible over the uproar. The parade, for the first time in living memory, was utterly transformed. No longer a ceremony, but a battleground. The story would race across London within minutes, the moment a royal guard and his warhorse defied every expectation, turning spectacle into salvation. And at the center of it all, Lily clung to her rabbit, Regal's mane brushing her cheek, as chaos finally gave way to hope. It was the kind of chaos that split time in two, before and after. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, but on Horse Guard's parade, it was the thunder of hooves that dominated every other sound. Reed, still astride Regal, caught the wild, darting eyes of the crowd, saw Turner's panicked face as the teen tried to maneuver his electric scooter through the surge of people. For a split second, their eyes met, the look of a desperate young man who realized he was in far too deep. Reed knew Turner was not going to stop. The way his hands clenched the scooter's grips, the way his jaw was set, he was determined to reach Lily, no matter the cost. "Regal, with me," Reed whispered, and the black warhorse, as if understanding every word, launched forward, scattering the onlookers who stumbled out of the way. The chase was on. Turner sped along the perimeter, trying to lose himself in the panicked mass. The scooter's wheels screeched against the ancient paving stones. Reed and Regal cut through the chaos like a blade, the massive horse's hooves drumming an urgent tattoo that made people gasp and leap aside. Reed could feel Regal's heartbeat, a steady war drum pounding beneath him, a promise that they'd face down whatever, together. Turner darted around a food vendor's cart, nearly knocking over a pyramid of souvenir hats. The vendor shouted, flinging his arms wide. A child shrieked as the scooter zoomed past, too close for comfort. Turner's backpack bounced wildly, its awkward shape suggesting something hidden and dangerous inside.
Reed's focus narrowed to a pinpoint. All the noise faded except for the rhythmic thud of Regal's stride and the whine of the scooter's electric motor. "Move aside," Reed shouted, his voice cutting through the din as he pointed toward Turner. "Police, make way!" His uniform, his command, and the fearsome presence of Regal parted the crowd like a ship's bow through water. Suddenly, Turner made a break for an opening, a side path leading off the mall toward St. James's Park. Reed reacted instantly, shifting his weight, signaling Regal with a sharp movement of the reins.
The warhorse responded with impossible agility, spinning on the spot, steel shoes sparking as he turned 180 degrees and lunged after the scooter. People scattered in all directions, some tripping over benches, others pressed against the ornate railings that lined the route. Turner, panting, risked a glance over his shoulder. He saw Reed and Regal closing in, saw the horse's nostrils flared, teeth bared in concentration, and for a moment his nerve wavered. Reed surged forward, his head lowered, ears pinned. Reed leaned in, urging more speed. "Go, boy, go!" The wind whipped past, stinging his face, but he didn't dare slow down. Ahead, Turner tried to weave between a group of tourists who were too startled to react in time. The scooter clipped the edge of a stroller, tipping it sideways. A mother screamed, but the child inside was unharmed, snatched back just in time by another bystander. Reed felt anger boil in his chest, not just at the danger to Lily, but to everyone caught in this reckless flight. He tightened his grip, signaling Regal to close the distance. The gap shrank, 20 feet, 15, 10. Turner, desperate, swerved sharply, heading for the narrowest part of the sidewalk. The scooter wobbled, struggling over the uneven stones. Reed saw his chance. He urged Regal one last time, and the horse surged forward, almost flying. In a single powerful leap, Regal blocked Turner's escape, rearing up just enough to force the teen to a sudden screeching stop. Turner lost control. The scooter slid sideways, crashing to the ground. Turner tumbled after it, rolling across the pavement. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath as the scene unfolded like a slow-motion film. Reed swung down from Regal in a fluid motion, landing with practiced precision. He approached Turner, who scrambled to his knees, eyes wild with panic and defeat. "Stay down," Reed commanded, his voice ironclad. Turner hesitated, glancing at the toppled scooter, then at the black horse looming over him. It was then that the contents of Turner's backpack spilled out: duct tape, zip ties, and a roll of heavy fabric. The implication was clear and chilling, broadcast in every live video now streaming across social media. This was no misunderstanding, no family dispute. It was a kidnapping, planned and ready. Police officers poured in, blue uniforms converging on the scene. The crowd parted to let them through. 2 constables pinned Turner to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back as he sputtered half-hearted protests. Reed didn't take his eyes off Turner until he was secure. He turned his attention back to Regal, running a steadying hand along the horse's sweaty neck. Regal was breathing hard, foam at the corners of his mouth, but his eyes were clear, proud. Reed whispered thanks, barely audible amid the chaos. "You did good, partner, real good." A small cheer broke out in the crowd, people clapping and shouting, a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. Several tourists still filming narrated for their phones. A real-life hero, and that horse, did you see that horse? The story was already becoming legend, passed from one trembling witness. Behind them, the sirens grew louder. Reed saw Lily, still sheltered by other guards, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes shining with hope. He nodded to her, a silent promise that she was safe now. Police officers searched Turner's backpack, displaying the evidence for all to see. Cameras zoomed in on the zip ties and tape. Other officers moved to secure Price, who had slumped by the van, defeat etched in every line of his body. In that moment, the centuries-old ceremony had been shattered, but something stronger had emerged, a new story born of bravery, instinct, and the unbreakable bond between soldier and horse. And as Reed led Regal back toward the parade ground, sirens wailing and the crowd parting before them, he knew this was a day London would not soon forget.
The echo of sirens faded into the roar of hundreds of voices, the chaos of the mall folding back into something more focused, more dangerous. Reed stood tall beside Regal, the black horse's breath coming in sharp bursts, steam rising from his back. The world felt sharper now, as if every sense had been heightened by adrenaline and fear. Reed kept a hand on Regal's bridle, his eyes locked on the suspects as Metropolitan Police swept in. Blue uniforms flooded the scene, radios crackling, hands pressed to holsters. For a moment, the centuries of ceremony seemed to fall away, replaced by the blunt reality of law enforcement in action. The officers quickly fanned out, some taking control of the crowd, others converging on Turner, who was still on the ground, his face pressed to the cold pavement. A pair of constables dragged Price from the shadow of the van, forcing him to his knees. His eyes darted from Lily to the crowd, searching for an exit, a lie, any hope. But there was none left. Reed stamped, head tossing, nostrils flaring. Reed spoke softly, just loud enough for his partner to hear. "Easy, boy. It's done now." Still, Regal's body stayed taut, as if waiting for one final signal to charge. Police officers rifled through the van, their gloved hands methodical. The crowd pressed in, phones thrust high, their faces awash of anxiety and morbid curiosity. Reed watched as a detective unzipped a duffel bag on the floor of the van, revealing a chilling inventory: rolls of duct tape, children's sedatives, rope, and a mattress pad wedged across the back seats, but not a single child's car seat, not a single toy of Lily's. The detective looked up, his face grave, then held the evidence aloft for his colleagues. A hush fell, even as the tourists continued filming. It wasn't just the spectacle now, it was the knowledge, heavy and inescapable, that a little girl had almost disappeared forever, and only a chain of intuition and courage had stopped it. Lily stood behind a cluster of officers, arms wrapped tightly around her rabbit, eyes darting between Reed, Regal, and her captors. For a moment, her knees buckled. Reed stepped toward her, but a female officer caught the girl, guiding her gently to the curb. Lily didn't cry, not now. She stared at the men as if trying to make sense of how something so ordinary had become a nightmare. The police moved quickly, cuffing Turner and Price, reading them their rights. One officer kept a steady hand on Turner's shoulder as he protested, his voice shrill, grasping for innocence. "It's not what it looks like. She's—" But the words died on his tongue as the crowd jeered. Reed stayed by Regal, his own breathing finally slowing. He watched the detectives log evidence, each new item cataloged and bagged. The tourists' faces shifted from fear to anger, then relief, then something like gratitude. Reed felt it too, a swelling pride for the regiment and his partner. The tourists would have a story to tell, but the only thing that mattered to him was that Lily was safe. The parade ground looked different now. Instead of a ceremonial field, it was a living crime scene, the place where centuries of tradition had met the violence of modern crime and survived. Social media had already exploded, live streams pinging from every corner of the crowd. The hashtag Regal the Hero trended within minutes. Headlines would soon scream of the brave guardsman and his warhorse, but none of that mattered in the moment. Reed lowered his head, sensing that the danger had passed. Reed rubbed his nose, whispering thanks. "You did it, old boy." The horse's ears flicked in response, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. A young officer approached Reed, her face pale but composed. "Sergeant, you and your horse, you just saved that little girl's life." Reed shook his head, glancing toward Lily. "It was Regal. He saw it before I did." The officer smiled, then turned back to her duty, directing tourists away from the evidence markers now dotted across the pavement. Suddenly, a group of bystanders burst into spontaneous applause. It rippled through the crowd, awkward at first, then growing, as people realized what had happened. Reed felt himself blush beneath the brim of his helmet. Regal lifted his head, ears pricked at the sound. A tourist, still filming, called out, "Thank you, officer! Thank you, horsey!"
Someone handed Lily a bottle of water, and she clutched it with shaking hands. The police finished their search, pulling out the last pieces of evidence: a bag of burner phones, a notebook filled with schedules and addresses, even a list of children's names. The implication was horrifying. Reed watched as the evidence was packed away, the suspects hauled to their feet, and the parade ground, for a moment, felt sacred again. Not because of the ceremony, but because of what had been prevented. Regal lowered his head, sensing that the danger had passed. Reed rubbed his nose, whispering thanks. "You did it, old boy." The horse's ears flicked in response, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. A young officer approached Reed, her face pale but composed. "Sergeant, you and your horse, you just saved that little girl's life." Reed shook his head, glancing toward Lily. It was Regal. He saw it before I did. The officer smiled, then turned back to her duty, directing tourists away from the evidence markers now dotted across the pavement. Suddenly, a group of bystanders burst into spontaneous applause. It rippled through the crowd, awkward at first, then growing, as people realized what had happened. Reed felt himself blush beneath the brim of his helmet. Regal lifted his head, ears pricked at the sound. A tourist, still filming, called out, "Thank you, officer! Thank you, horsey!" Someone handed Lily a bottle of water, and she clutched it with shaking hands. The police finished their search, pulling out the last pieces of evidence: a bag of burner phones, a notebook filled with schedules and addresses, even a list of children's names. The implication was horrifying. Reed watched as the evidence was packed away, the suspects hauled to their feet, and the parade ground, for a moment, felt sacred again. Not because of the ceremony, but because of what had been prevented.
Lily, still silent, finally looked at Reed and Regal, her eyes brimming with gratitude. She took a hesitant step forward, guided by an officer. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling but sure. Reed nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're safe now. That's what matters." As the crowd began to disperse, the band, shaken but determined, struck up a new tune. Life on the parade ground began to return, bit by bit. The danger had passed, but the story would live on, retold in pubs, in schools, on every screen across London. Regal stood tall, sweat drying on his coat, his breath finally easing. Reed took a long look around, letting the reality of what they'd done settle over him. Not every day would end like this, but today, for one little girl, the right people had been in the right place, and a warhorse's instincts had made all the difference. And so, beneath the watching eyes of the city, justice had been served. Not just by the law, but by the silent, unbreakable partnership between a soldier and his horse. The blue flashing lights faded from the square, replaced by the long shadows of early evening. The air, once thick with panic and adrenaline, now felt lighter, quieter, almost reverent. Horse Guards Parade began to return to itself, the remnants of the day's chaos slowly swept away by the careful hands of duty. But for those at the center of it all, the world had shifted. What had happened could never be fully erased, not from the stone, nor from the hearts of those involved. Inside the mounted regiment's inner yard, a private and protected place shielded from public view, Lily sat curled on a wooden bench. She was wrapped in a scratchy police-issue blanket, Daisy, the rabbit, clutched tightly to her chest. Her cheeks were still tear-streaked, and her shoes were caked with London dust. A female officer crouched beside her, murmuring reassurances. But it was clear that comfort had limits after what she'd endured. Regal, led in by Reed, stood just a few feet away. Even in the softening light, the big black horse seemed larger than life. Sweat drying on his flanks, his head lowered, the whites of his eyes showing just the smallest bit as he tried to process the energy of the day. A veterinarian, also the regiment's unofficial therapist, approached. Her touch gentle as she examined Regal's legs, whispered soothing words, and checked for signs of strain. But her eyes kept drifting to Lily, and eventually she made the suggestion everyone had been hoping for. "Would you like to say hello?" she asked the girl softly, gesturing to Regal. Lily looked up, uncertain, but then nodded. The therapist smiled, leading her gently by the hand. "He's a hero today, just like you. He's tired, but he'd love some company." Lily reached out, tentative at first, her fingers trembling as they brushed Regal's mane. The horse seemed to sense the fragility in her touch. He lowered his great head until his warm breath tickled her hand. For the first time since her ordeal began, Lily managed a small, genuine smile. Reed watched from a few paces away, relief flooding through him in waves. All the tension that had kept him upright for hours seemed to leave his body at once. He removed his helmet, running a hand through damp hair, letting the evening breeze cool his brow. Around him, the barracks hummed with quiet efficiency. Officers filing reports, evidence being catalogued, the distant murmur of radios and boots on stone. But here, in this little corner, time seemed to pause. Lily stroked Regal's nose, whispering things only the horse could hear. Regal's ears flicked back and forth, listening. The girl closed her eyes, breathing in the musky, comforting scent of horse. It was a different kind of therapy, silent, instinctive, primal. The therapist knelt beside her, quietly explaining how horses could sense people's feelings, how Regal had picked up on the fear and danger in the square, how he'd chosen to protect her without a second thought. "You're safe now," the therapist murmured. "Regal will keep you company while you wait for your mom." Lily nodded, her eyes never leaving the horse's gentle gaze. In that stillness, something inside her began to mend. It wasn't dramatic, no sobbing, no declarations, just the slow, steady return of trust. For the first time since she'd been taken, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel alone. Outside the yard, Reed could hear the distant sounds of the city picking up again. The band had resumed playing, the tourists had mostly drifted away, and the normal rhythm of London crept back in. He leaned against the fence, feeling the ache in his muscles and the raw sting of exhaustion. In a quiet moment, Corporal Mays appeared beside him, offering a mug of tea. "You did good, Sarge," Mays said, voice low. "You and that horse saved a life today."
Reed shook his head, smiling faintly. "Regal did most of it. I just listened." He sipped the tea, letting its warmth chase away the chill. They stood together in silence, both knowing that what had happened would become legend by morning. Eventually, the heavy iron gates creaked open, and a woman rushed through. Lily's mother. Her face was etched with fear, hope, and disbelief all at once. She called Lily's name, voice cracking. The girl turned, dropped Daisy for the first time all day, and ran into her mother's arms. The reunion was raw and wordless. The mother knelt, clinging to her daughter, tears soaking Lily's hair as she rocked her back and forth. The therapist quietly gathered Daisy and handed her back, then stepped away, giving them space. Reed found himself swallowing hard, blinking against the emotion that caught him off guard. Regal watched, ears pricked. Lily broke from her mother's hug just long enough to approach the horse one more time. She pressed her face into Regal's neck, hugging him as tightly as her arms allowed. "Thank you," she whispered, voice muffled in his mane. The horse nickered softly, his eyes closing as if savoring the moment. Lily's mother, overwhelmed, looked up at Reed and the officers. "Thank you, all of you. There aren't words." Her gratitude was tangled with relief, grief, and exhaustion. Reed nodded, stepping forward, his own voice thick. "She's brave. Strong, too. You should both get some rest." The mother nodded, gathering Lily and her things. As they left, Lily looked back, offering Regal one last wave. The yard emptied, leaving Reed and Regal alone under the early evening sky. Reed pressed his forehead to Regal's, breathing deep. "You saved her, buddy," he said softly. Regal nudged his chest, eyes soft and wise. In the quiet that followed, the meaning of the day finally began to settle. Not every day ended in heroics,
Most days were just routine. But today, a day when courage and instinct overpowered fear, would echo in the hearts of everyone who'd witnessed it. And in the hush of the barracks, beneath the old stone arches, a soldier and his warhorse stood together, changed forever by what they had done. Night settled gently over London, painting the city in hues of gold and blue. In the barracks, the parade ground was silent at last. Reed sat on a wooden bench outside Regal's stall, shoulders slumped, the weight of the day settling over him like a heavy cloak. He watched his partner, the great black horse who had, in so many ways, become more than an animal, more than a tool. Regal was a sentinel, a fellow soldier, and tonight, a hero. Reporters had gathered by the gates, their questions sharp, eyes searching for the soundbite or the photo that would define the day. Reed let others handle the press. He needed quiet, space to think. The world saw only the action, the chase, the rescue, but Reed knew what had really saved Lily Morgan. It wasn't just his own vigilance, nor the speed of the Metropolitan Police. It was something far older and far less understood, the ancient electric bond between a cavalryman and his horse. He listened to Regal breathe, the deep, measured rhythm calming him as it always did. In his mind, Reed replayed every second, not just the parade, but the endless hours of training, the 1,000 little lessons that had led them to this moment. The world called Regal a hero, but Reed remembered the stubborn colt who had once refused to trust anyone. The nights spent in patient silence until finally Regal had chosen to trust him. Reed's thoughts drifted to the events of the afternoon, to the frantic stamping, the cues only he and Regal understood. No device could have picked up on the wrongness in the air the way Regal did. Security cameras watched, microphones recorded, but it was Regal's hooves on stone, the slight shiver in his skin that signaled danger before anyone else saw it. He remembered something the regiment's veterinarian had told him once. Horses have 360-degree hearing. Their ears rotate, picking up frequencies human ears can't detect. Their hooves sense vibrations, subtle tremors running through the ground that alert them to approaching storms or predators, or, on a busy city afternoon, a van with something not quite right humming in its engine. Even the finest electronic sensors struggled to keep pace with what a horse felt instinctively. But it wasn't only biology, it was partnership. Over months, Reed and Regal had built a language of their own. 3 hooves stamped, urgent danger. 2, move. 1, be ready. Today, those signals had made the difference between tragedy and triumph. A young recruit joined Reed, curiosity bright in his eyes. "Sarge, how'd you know something was off, before anyone else?" Reed smiled, tired but warm. "I didn't. Regal did. I just listened." The recruit nodded, thoughtful, glancing at the big horse with new respect. Later, inside the regimental mess, officers and troopers gathered around battered tables, mugs of tea and pints of ale in hand. The talk turned serious. Someone asked, "Are we just here for the ceremony? For show?" Reed shook his head, remembering everything that had happened. "The ceremony's what people see. It's tradition, pride, all of that. But our real job is to protect. We are the last line. When something goes wrong, we can't hesitate." He paused, letting his words settle. Today proved it. We're not just statues. We're guardians. The room fell silent, every trooper there thinking of the day's events. Reed's mind replayed the moment when time froze. Regal between Lily and the van, the crowd holding its breath, the decision to act. The regimental commander, Colonel Hawthorne, stood and raised his glass. To courage, to instinct, to never losing sight of why we wear the uniform. The toast was echoed around the room, voices rough but proud. Reed met Hawthorne's gaze and nodded, feeling the truth of it settle inside him. But for Reed, the lesson was even deeper. He thought of the countless times technology had failed, when all the cameras and sensors in the world couldn't detect the human or animal element. Regal's senses, his intuition, were what machines aspired to and never truly matched. That knowledge, that trust, couldn't be engineered or downloaded. It had to be lived day after day, with sweat, patience, and love. Later, when the barracks had quieted and only the distant city lights remained, Reed returned to Regal's stall. The horse greeted him with a low nicker, ears flicking in the dark. Reed stroked his nose, whispering, "We did good, didn't we?" Reed pressed his great head against Reed's chest, as if in answer. Reed thought about the real mission of the Household Cavalry. The uniforms, the parades, they drew the crowds. But underneath, every rider knew their real job was readiness. Readiness for anything. A threat, an emergency, the kind of horror that no one ever expects in a place built on ceremony and peace. The cavalry had always been the Queen's shield, the city's silent defense. He remembered the tourists' faces as the chase unfolded. Fear, awe, hope. He thought of Lily's eyes, looking up at Regal with gratitude and wonder. That, more than any medal or headline, was the measure of their day. Before leaving for the night, Reed checked Regal's legs, ran a brush down his flanks, murmured thanks in the darkness. He knew that by morning, the world would be clamoring for interviews, for the story from the heroic guardsman. But Reed understood. The real hero stood on 4 legs, his mane still damp with sweat, his heart steady as a drum. Outside, the city carried on. Taxis rushed past, nightlife hummed, and London's heartbeat never slowed. But in one quiet stable, history had been written, not just with courage, but with instinct, partnership, and the unspoken language between a man and his horse. And as Reed turned out the light, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, ready, alert, and always listening for the signal that only they could hear. Morning sunlight crept across the city, casting Horse Guards parade in a golden haze. The echoes of sirens, shouts, and frantic hoofbeats were gone, replaced by the gentle sounds of London returning to routine. But for those who had witnessed what happened, and for those whose lives had been changed, the events of the previous day shimmered just beneath the surface. Sergeant Daniel Reed stood again at his post, Regal beneath him, both as polished and composed as ever, but now transformed by what they'd endured together. Crowds had gathered early, some hoping to glimpse the now famous pair, others simply drawn by the magnetic pull of ceremony and history. Reed's phone buzzed with messages from friends, family, and strangers. The regiment's social media overflowed with praise. News outlets replayed grainy clips of the rescue, and hashtags like #RegalTheHero and #LondonGuard trended worldwide. For a city used to spectacle, this was something more. A real story, alive and brimming with consequence. But for Reed, all the noise faded the moment his shift began. He felt the familiar weight of the uniform, the creak of leather, the warm presence of Regal beneath him. He thought of Lily Morgan, safe at home with her mother, likely waking up from the first real night's sleep she'd had in days. He thought of Price and Turner behind bars, and of the crowd, hundreds of bystanders who would now always look twice, always wonder what they would do if they saw something strange. As the hour for the next ceremonial change approached, Reed's mind replayed the chaos, the decisions made in split seconds, and the lessons that had crystallized in the aftermath. It wasn't just about heroics. It was about attention, courage, and the willingness to act, qualities not reserved for soldiers or guards, but for anyone, anywhere. The world was different now. Cameras were everywhere, documenting everything. Reed had watched countless tourists record the drama on their phones, but it was the few who dropped their screens, stepped forward, and shouted for help who had made a real difference. It was the instinct to act, not just to observe, that mattered most. He wondered how many would carry that lesson forward. He remembered the question the regimental commander had posed the night before, his voice echoing off the walls of the officers' mess. If you saw something wrong, would you act or would you just film? Reed had no easy answer, but he knew that, for one brief, brilliant moment, action had triumphed over apathy. The press had called Reed and Regal heroes. The truth was messier. He'd acted on instinct, drawn by the silent language between himself and his horse, by a child's whisper, by the pulse of danger only Regal could sense. There had been no time for doubt, only the burning need to protect. In the weeks that followed, the story's ripples spread. Parents held their children closer in public places. Schools used the tale as a lesson in both safety and courage. The Household Cavalry's image changed, if only slightly, no longer just ceremonial, but deeply, unforgettably real. For Reed, the greatest reward came quietly, away from the cameras. One afternoon, Lily and her mother returned to the barracks at the regiment's invitation. Reed met them in the stables, where Regal stood munching hay, blissfully unaware of his newfound fame. Lily ran to the horse without hesitation, arms flung around his neck. She whispered her thanks again, then pressed a drawing into Reed's hand. An image of a black horse, a soldier, and a little girl standing together. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for seeing me." The moment hit Reed harder than any headline or medal could. He knelt, thanking Lily and her mother, telling them that bravery comes in many forms. It was Lily's courage, her quiet plea for help, that had started it all. The circle of trust, instinct, and response had saved her, and it was a reminder that no one acts alone. Before Lily left, she placed a ribbon around Regal's neck, bright red with tiny gold stars. Reed watched as Regal nuzzled the girl gently, eyes closing as if savoring the peace. As summer deepened, life returned to its routines. The parades resumed, the crowds swelled and faded, and London's river of history kept flowing. Reed took comfort in the steady rhythm, in the partnership with Regal, in the knowledge that preparedness was not just a slogan, but a way of life. Yet something had changed for Reed, for his fellow guards, and perhaps for the city itself. The lesson of that day, its danger, its chaos, and its unexpected moments of grace, became a quiet undercurrent. In every crowd, someone would remember the black horse, the soldier who listened, the little girl who was seen and saved. Now, as Reed surveyed the crowd, he caught the eye of a boy perched on his father's shoulders, waving at Regal with unguarded joy. Reed smiled, feeling the connection stretch between them, a promise that someone was always watching, always ready to protect. And so, as the bugle sounded and the ceremony began anew, Reed thought of the question posed to every person who had seen the videos, read the headlines, or stood in the square that day. If you saw something wrong, would you act or just watch? It was a challenge, a lesson, and a call to action. He hoped with all his heart that the answer would be the one that saved lives. So, if you find yourself in a moment of uncertainty, a frozen instant when instinct whispers that something isn't right, remember the guardsman and his horse, the little girl, and the crowd who chose not to look away. And when you see courage in the ordinary, when you find yourself called to step forward, trust that even the smallest act can change the course of someone's life. If you followed this story, if you felt its heartbeat, don't just let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of unsung heroes, ordinary people and their extraordinary acts, keeping London and the world a little safer, one decision at a time.